In a shocking twist of justice, a judge finds a humble mechanic for wearing a cross, only to discover the man is a self-taught legal genius who turns the courtroom into a masterclass on constitutional rights. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Judge Richard Harrington sat at his bench, a stern expression etched on his face. He had earned a reputation for being tough but fair, though today he seemed particularly irritated by the defendant standing before him. The man in question, Marcus Johnson, stood tall and composed despite the circumstances. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks, Marcus wore a small silver cross around his neck that gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Harrington began, his voice dripping with disapproval, "you were cited for violating our city's dress code ordinance, which prohibits wearing religious symbols in certain public settings. This is not your first offense either. You've been warned multiple times about this issue." Marcus nodded calmly, his eyes meeting the judge's without hesitation. "Your Honor," he replied respectfully, "I understand the law, but I also believe it infringes upon my constitutional rights to freely express my faith. Wearing this cross is an integral part of who I am as a person." The judge leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes. "Are you questioning the legality of the ordinance, Mr. Johnson?" he asked sharply. "Not at all, Your Honor," Marcus responded smoothly. "But if we're going to discuss legality, perhaps we should examine whether such ordinances align with the principles enshrined in the First Amendment." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some spectators exchanged surprised glances. Others whispered among themselves. No one expected Marcus, a quiet, unassuming figure, to challenge the judge so directly. But there was something about the way he spoke, with clarity and confidence, that made everyone sit up straighter. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Harrington delivered his verdict. His voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the silence like a blade. "Enough," he barked, slamming his gavel down with an audible crack that echoed off the walls. Every head in the room turned toward him, their eyes wide with anticipation, or perhaps apprehension, as they awaited his next words. "You will pay a fine of $500 for violating the ordinance," the judge declared, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And let me remind you, Mr. Johnson, that contempt of court carries additional penalties. If you persist in challenging the authority of this court, you'll find yourself facing more serious consequences." For many defendants, such a pronouncement would have been met with panic or resignation. But Marcus Johnson remained unfazed. Standing tall before the bench, his posture exuded calm confidence, even defiance. There was something almost magnetic about him, a quiet assurance that seemed to radiate outward, drawing attention without effort. Without hesitation, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if he had anticipated this outcome all along. With precise strokes of his pen, he filled out the check for the exact amount of the fine, tore it from the book, and handed it to the bailiff standing nearby. "Thank you, Your Honor," Marcus said politely, his voice steady and respectful. It wasn't sarcasm, but rather a genuine acknowledgement, though there was an undertone of something else, perhaps amusement, perhaps determination, that lingered beneath his words. Then, just as the bailiff stepped away, Marcus added, "Before I leave, may I ask a brief question?" The request caught everyone by surprise, including the judge. Spectators exchanged glances, some leaning forward in their seats, eager to hear what might come next. Even the stenographer paused mid-typing, her fingers hovering over the keys as she waited for the judge's response. For a moment, Judge Harrington hesitated. He seemed taken aback, not only by the audacity of the request, but also by the fact that Marcus appeared so composed after being fined. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge muttered gruffly, "Proceed." Marcus took a deep breath, his expression thoughtful yet resolute. "Could you clarify the legal precedent used to justify the ordinance prohibiting the display of religious symbols?" he asked, his voice clear and measured. Specifically, how does it reconcile with the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which prohibits government interference in matters of religion? A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmuring amongst themselves. Some leaned closer to their neighbors, whispering excitedly about the boldness of Marcus's inquiry. Others simply stared, slack-jawed, unable to believe what they were hearing. This wasn't just any defendant. This was someone who clearly understood the intricacies of constitutional law and wasn't afraid to use that knowledge to challenge authority. Judge Harrington blinked several times, visibly stunned. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, betraying a flicker of discomfort. Clearly, he hadn't expected this turn of events. After a long pause, during which the silence in the courtroom grew heavier, the judge cleared his throat. "That's a complicated matter best left to appellate courts," he stammered, his usual confidence wavering. "This court has ruled based on existing statutes." But Marcus wasn't done. Far from it. He tilted his head thoughtfully, his gaze never wavering from the judge. "Ah, I see," he replied, his tone polite yet probing. "However, wouldn't it be prudent to revisit those statutes in light of recent Supreme Court rulings? For instance, cases like *Kennedy v. Bremerton School District * or *American Legion v. American Humanist Association *, both reinforce the protection of individual religious expression. Doesn't that suggest a potential conflict between the ordinance and established constitutional principles?" The courtroom erupted into murmurs once again, louder this time. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while spectators whispered animatedly, speculating about the implications of Marcus's argument. Many couldn't help but marvel at the depth of his understanding. Here was a man, a mechanic, no less, who spoke with the authority of a seasoned attorney. His questions weren't rhetorical flourishes designed to provoke. They were carefully constructed challenges rooted in case law and precedent. Each word carried weight, each point meticulously considered. Even Judge Harrington seemed momentarily paralyzed by the force of Marcus's logic. He adjusted his glasses, squinting down at the case file in front of him, as if searching for answers, or perhaps stalling for time. When he finally looked up, his expression was one of reluctant admiration tinged with frustration. "Where did you study law, Mr. Johnson?" he asked abruptly, his voice laced with disbelief. Marcus chuckled softly, breaking the tension with a hint of levity. "I didn't, Your Honor," he admitted. "At least, not formally. I'm actually a mechanic by trade." A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery, though it quickly faded as Marcus continued. "But when something affects me personally, like the right to practice my faith, I take the time to educate myself. Knowledge is power, after all." The judge's eyebrows shot up, his skepticism giving way to genuine curiosity. "You're self-taught?" he asked incredulously. "Yes, sir," Marcus confirmed, nodding. "I've read every relevant Supreme Court decision, every federal statute, and countless scholarly articles on constitutional law. I figured if the law applies to me, I ought to understand it thoroughly." Once again, the courtroom fell silent. All eyes were on Marcus now, not because he had defied authority, but because he had done so with intelligence, grace, and undeniable conviction. In that moment, he wasn't just a defendant fighting a fine. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the idea that anyone could rise above their circumstances with enough determination and drive. Judge Harrington leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to process everything that had transpired. For years, he had presided over countless cases, issuing rulings with little resistance. Yet here was Marcus Johnson, a man who refused to accept injustice quietly, who dared to hold the system accountable using its own language. It was humbling and deeply unsettling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge sighed deeply. "Mr. Johnson," he began slowly, his voice softer now, "it seems I may have underestimated you. While I cannot overturn the ordinance here today, I must admit that your arguments are compelling. Perhaps it's time for higher authorities to reconsider its validity." Marcus nodded graciously, accepting the acknowledgement without gloating. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said simply. "All I ask is that the law be applied fairly and consistently, regardless of one's beliefs." As Marcus turned to leave the courtroom, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Reporters scrambled to intercept him, thrusting microphones in his face and firing off rapid-fire questions. How had he managed to acquire such extensive legal knowledge? Did he plan to pursue further action against the ordinance? Was he considering a career in law? Through it all, Marcus remained composed, answering each query with patience and humility. "I'm just an ordinary guy who believes in doing what's right," he told them, his smile warm and sincere. "If sharing my experience encourages people to learn more about their rights, then maybe some good can come out of this." Back inside the courtroom, Judge Harrington sat alone, reflecting on the day's events. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had learned something valuable, not just about the law, but about the importance of listening to those who might seem powerless at first glance. Marcus Johnson had reminded him that justice wasn't merely about enforcing rules. It was about ensuring fairness, equity, and respect for every individual's dignity. And in that realization, the true revelation of the day became clear. Sometimes, the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with anticipation and whispers just moments before, now felt electric with possibility. Judge Harrington's demeanor shifted noticeably as he processed Marcus Johnson's articulate challenge to the ordinance. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, the judge found himself questioning not only the defendant standing before him, but also the very foundations of the laws he enforced daily. It was a rare moment of introspection for someone accustomed to wielding authority with unshakable confidence. After Marcus's revelation that he was self-taught, a mechanic by trade who had immersed himself in constitutional law out of personal necessity, the judge sat back, visibly unsettled. His fingers drummed lightly on the bench, betraying his internal struggle. He glanced down at the case file again, flipping through pages almost absent-mindedly, though it was clear he wasn't reading anymore. Instead, he seemed lost in thought, grappling with the implications of what Marcus had said. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Judge Harrington removed his glasses and leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the bench. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of its earlier sharpness or impatience. "Mr. Johnson," he began slowly, deliberately, "I must admit, your understanding of the law is remarkable." There was a pause, during which the judge appeared to weigh his words carefully. "In all my years on the bench, I've never encountered someone so thoroughly prepared, especially under these circumstances." Marcus stood quietly, maintaining his composure despite the gravity of the moment. His expression remained calm, though there was a subtle spark of satisfaction in his eyes. He nodded respectfully, acknowledging the judge's acknowledgement without gloating. "Thank you, Your Honor," he replied simply, his tone measured and humble. "As I mentioned earlier, I believe knowledge empowers us to advocate for ourselves and others. If we don't understand the rules, how can we ensure they're applied fairly?" The judge nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by Marcus's sincerity. "That's a powerful sentiment," he admitted, "and yet it raises difficult questions about the system itself. Are we doing enough to educate people about their rights? Or are we relying too heavily on assumptions that everyone understands the intricacies of the law?" These weren't rhetorical questions. They were genuine reflections, spoken aloud as if the judge needed to hear them himself. For a brief moment, the courtroom seemed suspended in time. Even the spectators, who had been whispering among themselves throughout the proceedings, fell silent, sensing the significance of the exchange unfolding before them. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a reckoning, a turning point where justice intersected with humanity. Breaking the silence, Judge Harrington continued, his voice tinged with both admiration and regret. "While I cannot overturn the ordinance today, this court operates within certain constraints. I recognize the validity of your concerns. Your arguments have given me much to consider, Mr. Johnson. Perhaps it's time for higher authorities to reevaluate whether such ordinances align with our constitutional values." With those words, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. What had started as a routine hearing had transformed into something far greater, a catalyst for change. Marcus didn't respond immediately, allowing the weight of the judge's statement to settle over the courtroom. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and resolute. "Thank you, Your Honor. All I ask is fairness, not special treatment, but consistency in applying the principles enshrined in our Constitution. If this case sparks a broader conversation about protecting individual freedoms, then perhaps some good can come from it." His words resonated deeply, earning murmurs of agreement from the gallery. Some attendees nodded approvingly, while others exchanged knowing glances. Among them were reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks, capturing every detail of this extraordinary scene. One journalist whispered excitedly to her colleague, "This isn't just a story about a fine. It's a David and Goliath moment, a mechanic taking on the system and winning respect, if not outright victory." As the proceedings drew to a close, Judge Harrington rose from his seat, signaling the end of the session. But instead of the usual brisk dismissal, he paused near the edge of the bench, looking directly at Marcus. "Mr. Johnson," he said solemnly, "you've reminded me why I became a judge in the first place, to uphold justice, even when it challenges the status quo. Thank you for that reminder." Marcus offered a slight bow of his head, a gesture of mutual respect. "And thank you, Your Honor, for listening," he replied softly. Then, with quiet dignity, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a courtroom filled with reflection and renewed hope. Outside, reporters swarmed Marcus as soon as he stepped into the hallway. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted toward him, and questions came rapid fire. How did he acquire such extensive legal knowledge? Did he plan to pursue further action against the ordinance? Could he inspire others to stand up for their rights? Through it all, Marcus maintained his composure, answering each query with patience and humility. "I'm just an ordinary guy who believes in doing what's right," he told them, his smile warm and sincere. "If sharing my experience encourages people to learn more about their rights, then maybe some good can come out of this." Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Judge Harrington lingered alone, staring at the empty space where Marcus had stood. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something profound, a collision of intellect, courage, and integrity that transcended the confines of a single case. As he gathered his papers and prepared to leave, he made a mental note to review similar ordinances in his jurisdiction. Perhaps, he thought, this encounter would lead to meaningful reform, not just for Marcus Johnson, but for countless others whose voices deserved to be heard. In the days and weeks that followed, news of Marcus's courtroom performance spread far and wide. Legal scholars praised his grasp of complex constitutional issues, while civil rights advocates hailed him as a symbol of resilience and determination. Yet Marcus himself returned to his garage, content to continue fixing cars and quietly educating anyone willing to listen about the power of knowledge and justice. What began as a simple act of defiance, a refusal to remove a cross, had evolved into a turning point for both Marcus and the system he challenged. And somewhere along the way, a single man's unwavering commitment to principle transformed not only his own life, but the lives of countless others inspired by his courage. The aftermath of Marcus Johnson's courtroom confrontation rippled outward, creating waves far beyond the confines of that single hearing. What had started as a seemingly minor legal infraction, a citation for wearing a cross in violation of an obscure local ordinance, had evolved into something much larger, a story of courage, intellect, and the enduring power of constitutional principles. As Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed him like bees to honey, their cameras flashing incessantly, their questions rapid-fire and insistent. Yet despite the chaos surrounding him, Marcus remained composed, his calm demeanor a testament to the quiet strength he had demonstrated throughout the trial. "Mr. Johnson," one reporter shouted above the din, How did you come to know so much about constitutional law? Did you attend law school? Marcus chuckled softly at the question, shaking his head as he adjusted the strap of his leather bag slung over his shoulder. No, I didn't go to law school, he replied, his voice steady and measured. I'm just a mechanic by trade. But when something affects me personally, like my right to express my faith, I take the time to educate myself. Knowledge is power, after all. His answer was met with murmurs of admiration from the crowd gathered around him. Here was a man who embodied the American ideal of self-reliance, someone who refused to let ignorance or fear stand in the way of justice. Another journalist pressed further, her microphone practically brushing against Marcus's chest. Do you plan to challenge this ordinance again? Are you considering taking your case to a higher court? Marcus paused thoughtfully before responding, his dark eyes scanning the sea of eager faces. For now, he said, choosing his words carefully, I want people to think about what happened here today. This isn't just about me. It's about whether we're truly living up to the promises made in our Constitution. If others feel inspired to learn more about their rights or speak out against injustices they see, then maybe some good can come out of this. His humility struck a chord with those listening, particularly because it contrasted sharply with the audacity of his courtroom performance. While Marcus had dismantled the judge's arguments with the precision of a seasoned attorney, he carried none of the arrogance often associated with legal professionals. Instead, he exuded a quiet confidence born not of entitlement, but of hard-earned knowledge. It was clear that Marcus wasn't seeking fame or recognition. He simply wanted fairness, a principle that resonated deeply with everyone present. As the media frenzy continued outside the courthouse, news of Marcus's remarkable defense spread like wildfire across social platforms and traditional outlets alike. Headlines blared phrases like, "Mechanic turns legal genius," and "Cross-wearing defendant schools judge on First Amendment rights." Within hours, Marcus's name trended nationwide, sparking debates about religious freedom, civil liberties, and the accessibility of legal education. Talk shows invited experts to weigh in on the implications of Marcus's argument, while podcasts dissected every detail of the courtroom exchange. Social media users shared memes featuring Marcus alongside quotes from landmark Supreme Court cases, turning him into an unlikely cultural icon. Legal scholars and civil rights advocates were among the most vocal supporters of Marcus's stance. Prominent constitutional lawyers praised his understanding of complex legal doctrines, noting how deftly he had cited recent Supreme Court decisions such as Kennedy v. Bremerton School District and American Legion v. American Humanist Association. These rulings reinforced the protection of individual religious expression, making Marcus's critique of the ordinance all the more compelling. One professor of constitutional law wrote an op-ed calling Marcus's performance a masterclass in civic engagement, arguing that his example should inspire ordinary citizens to take ownership of their rights rather than passively accepting injustice. Meanwhile, grassroots organizations seized upon Marcus's story as a rallying cry for reform. Civil rights groups launched petitions urging lawmakers to revisit ordinances like the one Marcus had challenged, framing them as outdated relics that infringed upon fundamental freedoms. Faith-based communities rallied behind him, organizing vigils and prayer sessions to celebrate his act of defiance. For many believers, Marcus represented not only a champion of religious liberty, but also a reminder of the importance of standing firm in one's convictions, even when faced with opposition. Inside the courtroom, Judge Richard Harrington grappled with his own reflections on the day's events. As he sat alone at his bench, the echoes of Marcus's words still lingered in the air. The judge removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture that betrayed both exhaustion and deep contemplation. He replayed the proceedings in his mind, marveling at the poise and intelligence Marcus had displayed. Never in his decades-long career had he encountered someone so thoroughly prepared to argue their case, not even attorneys fresh out of top-tier law schools. What troubled Judge Harrington most, however, was the realization that Marcus's arguments had exposed a flaw not just in the ordinance, but in the broader system it represented. How could laws be crafted and enforced without adequate consideration for their alignment with constitutional values? Was it possible that years of unquestioned authority had blinded judges like himself to the human impact of their rulings? These questions gnawed at him, prompting a rare moment of introspection about the role of the judiciary in safeguarding individual freedoms. Determined to address these concerns, Judge Harrington decided to take action. Over the following weeks, he reached out to colleagues within the judicial system, sharing Marcus's insights and advocating for a review of similar ordinances across jurisdictions. At first, some of his peers dismissed his concerns as overly idealistic, arguing that overturning long-standing regulations would open a Pandora's box of legal challenges. But Judge Harrington persisted, pointing to recent precedents and emphasizing the moral imperative to protect constitutional rights. Gradually, his efforts began to gain traction, leading to discussions among policymakers about revisiting and potentially repealing laws deemed incompatible with modern interpretations of the First Amendment. Back in his garage, Marcus returned to his daily routine of fixing cars, though his newfound notoriety meant he was no longer anonymous. Customers often arrived with stories of how his actions had inspired them to stand up for their beliefs or delve deeper into understanding their rights. Some brought gifts, a homemade pie here, a bouquet of flowers there, as tokens of gratitude. Others simply wanted to shake his hand and thank him for reminding them that ordinary people could make extraordinary contributions to society. Despite the attention, Marcus remained grounded, attributing his success to perseverance rather than innate brilliance. "I'm not special," he told anyone who asked. "I just took the time to read and think critically about issues that mattered to me. Anyone can do that if they're willing to put in the effort." To prove his point, he began hosting informal workshops in his community, teaching neighbors about constitutional law and encouraging them to engage with the legal system proactively. These sessions quickly gained popularity, drawing participants from diverse backgrounds, united by a shared desire to understand and defend their rights. Reflecting on the broader impact of his experience, Marcus recognized that his journey wasn't just about challenging an unjust ordinance, it was about empowering others to do the same. By standing up for himself, he had inadvertently sparked a movement, demonstrating that courage and knowledge could dismantle barriers erected by ignorance and prejudice. And while he knew the fight for justice was far from over, he felt hopeful knowing that he had planted seeds of change that would continue to grow long after the spotlight faded. In the end, Marcus's story became more than a tale of one man's triumph over adversity. It served as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative potential of education. Through his unwavering commitment to principle, Marcus had shown that true justice wasn't handed down from above. It was forged through collective action, driven by individuals brave enough to demand better. As he tightened a bolt on a customer's car engine late one evening, Marcus smiled to himself, knowing that his work, both in the courtroom and the garage, was far from finished.